Okay, this is decompression problem number 4, Navy Tables Revision 7, 2017. First dive, leave surface 10 o'clock, leave bottom 10:30, tells us we have a 30-minute bottom time, depth is 140 feet. As with all the Navy examples, first dive is going to be charted on the City College dive chart, so we know Navy definition of bottom time, leave surface to leave bottom, 140 for 30 minutes. Is that a decompression dive? Well, let's go ahead and look at the tables here. Actually certain that it is. 140 tells us our no decompression limit is 10 feet. So this is going to be a dive that requires us to stop in the water column. So we'll go ahead and chart this dive. 140 for 30 is our schedule, and now we must look at what our stop schedules are. Where do we find that information? We must scroll down to the standard air decompression tables and find 140 feet. I'm giving you nice round numbers here. If I gave you a dive that was 142 feet, you're going to take that depth and round it up, obviously. Okay, so let's look for 140 feet. There's 120, 130, 140. And we're looking for a bottom time of 30 minutes. Okay, and happens to fit right here. We're going to use standard air in water decompression. We're not using air or oxygen. Using oxygen is going to double your rate of off-gassing and shorten your decompression times by about half. So these are our stops that we're going to chart here for in-water air. It tells us we have two stops, one for 7 minutes at 30 feet right here, and then another at 20 feet for 37 minutes. So 7 and 37 are our stops. Let's go ahead and fill out the chart. Again, I'm concerned at this point right now with you getting the depths, the repet groups, the times correct. The bailout pressures and rack pressures, we're not too concerned about that right now. We can make up numbers and put them in there. But I want you to get used to filling out this chart properly for use in other classes, particularly hyperbaric chamber operations. Okay, 140 for 30. It is US Navy R7, USN R7. That is what I'm going to use, and I go ahead and write my depths and times down here to start. So 140 for 30. Then my first stop is going to be at 30 feet for 7 minutes and 20 feet for 37 minutes. Last stop will be 0 feet, and I can put a line through here, indicating that there's infinite time spent on the surface. If we leave the surface at 10 o'clock and we're going to 140 feet, that should take us at 75 feet a minute. It's going to take us 2 minutes to get to bottom. Again, it's an insignificant number. It's more for charting purposes that the Navy uses that 75 foot a minute descent rate. That's awful fast. I know a few divers that can equalize their ears that fast, and it really doesn't matter how fast you equalize your ears. It matters what you do when you get down there. So we'll put in 10:02 for reach bottom time, but the important number here is leave bottom at 10:30, because once you leave the surface, you are on bottom time. The clock is ticking. So our actual bottom time is 30 minutes. This is the first dive of the day. There is no residual nitrogen time. There is no repetitive group, since it's not a repetitive dive. So our total bottom time is just the actual dive time of 30 minutes. We're going to leave the bottom here at 10:30. We're going to write this in 3 different spots, here, here, and here. So we leave the bottom at 10:30. Now we have to travel up to 30 feet. That is 110 lineal feet that we're traveling, or 220 seconds. That happens to be 3 minutes and change. Ascent time, we're going to take that number and we're going to round it up to 4 minutes to pad the diver's decompression. Even though he arrives there, if he travels perfectly at 30 feet a minute, he's going to be reaching there 220 seconds later, or 3 minutes and 40 seconds. So we're going to pad his decompression by about 20 seconds. So we'll start his decompression time at 10:34. We're going to add 7 minutes to it. That means we're going to leave and move the diver at 10:41 up to his 20-foot stop. Once we reach and move that diver from the 30-foot stop, this clock is rolling for the 20-foot stop. So we really don't care decompression-wise what time we reach there, because once we move that diver, ascent time is included as part of stop time according to the new Navy protocol that was issued in 2008. Okay, so I like to draw a line through this. Even though it would take us 20 seconds to reach there, we'll still come up at 30 feet a minute. Stay there for 37 minutes. That means we're going to be leaving there at 11:18. 11:18 is what time we're going to travel to the surface. Now we're traveling 20 feet to the surface. That's 40 seconds. And we're going to round that number up to a minute. 11:19 is what time we're going to reach the surface. 11:19 in our repet group is N. How we find that is we look over here, 140 for 30, do our stop, scroll across, and we are an N diver. Okay. Again, chamber O2 periods, we're not concerned about if we're doing a SIRDI O2. We'll get to that later in hyperbarics. And we're not doing in-water oxygen. So the Navy allows us a repet group of N. It is rare that you're going to repet after a decompression dive, but regardless, we'll put it on here for charting purposes. Total time of dive is leave surface to reach surface, and it's an hour and 19 minutes. Fill in some weather information here and visibility just for example purposes. Okay, so at 11:19 I'm an N diver. I'm going to take that information and transpose it onto the second dive here. Second dive at the beginning of our surface interval, 11:19, I'm an N diver. Again, I'm going to ask you the same things on each example. Dive number 2, I'm going to ask you the maximum bottom time to make a no decompression or no stop dive. I have to give you a depth and I have to give you a leave surface time to compute this. I'm giving that to you here, telling you that you're going to leave the surface at 2000. That is 8 o'clock at night. The difference between 2000 and 11:19 is 8 hours and 41 minutes. So I'm an N diver at the beginning of my surface interval. I can go ahead and compute out what my new group would be going back in the water. While the diver is up on the surface for these 8 hours and 41 minutes, they're exhaling and breathing off this excess nitrogen that is coming out of their tissues back to their heart and lungs, and they're off-gassing. So the diver will no longer have N amount of nitrogen in their body. We have to now quantify how much of that is left. So if we're N at the beginning of our surface interval, and we stay up for 841, right here is where 841 would fit, between 751 and 842. Look at that. Another couple minutes and you could move over another group. In reality, we would probably wait until we get over into this group. But regardless, we're going to go ahead and chart this dive because that's what the example says. So 841 fits here, and we are an E diver going back into the water at 2000 hours, going to 120 feet. So this E diver is going to have residual nitrogen time. We cannot stay for the entire time that the tables allow us for because we have residual nitrogen time. How much? This table here, residual nitrogen time table, will quantify that. So if we look at E and come over here to where E intersects with 120 feet, we find that we have 14 minutes of residual nitrogen time in our bodies before we even get in the water. Well, wow, that's a lot of residual nitrogen time at 120 feet. The no decompression limit is 15 minutes. If you have 15 minutes of total nitrogen time maximum allowed, and we're going to be in the water for 14 of those 15 minutes, that only leaves us a minute for bottom time. Now in reality, folks, we couldn't even get to 120 feet in a minute, but we're just doing this for charting and example purposes. So we'll say that we have a super diver that's going to be able to rapidly descend to 120 feet. Don't get me wrong, there's some divers I know that can do that, but you're not going to be able to accomplish much. So we'll go ahead and chart this dive anyway. The answer for this problem is 1 minute maximum actual dive time. When added to the 14 minutes, gives us an equivalent single dive time of 15 minutes, 120 for 15 is going to be our schedule right here, 120 for 15. And if we scroll up, 120 for 15 puts us on the surface as an F diver, an F diver. Well, 8 hours and 41 minutes, leaving the surface at 2000. Going to leave the bottom then at 2001. Now we have 240 seconds of ascent time. Depth in feet times 2 is 240. 240 seconds of ascent time happens to be a nice round 4 minutes exactly. Divide 60 into 240, goes in 4 minutes exactly. We'll go ahead and add that to 2001, reaching the surface at 2005 as an F diver. Take that information, transpose it over onto the square wave profile for dive number 3 at the beginning of the surface interval. I am now going to ask you what your minimum surface interval is to make a no decompression dive given a certain depth and given a certain bottom time. The depth happens to be 65 feet, and I'm telling you, you have a task that's going to take you 30 minutes. How long do you need to wait on the surface before you can make this dive a no decompression dive? You know you have residual nitrogen in your body. So we know that we're going to 65 feet and we want to make it a no decompression dive. So your first task is to define the limits of a no decompression dive at 65 feet. Well, there is no 65 foot. We're going to come here to the no decompression limit table and look for 65 feet. There is not one. So we're going to round that number up to 70 feet. We find that the limit is 48 minutes. So if the limit is 48 minutes and you're going to be in the water for 30 of those minutes, that only leaves you a maximum allowable residual nitrogen time of 18 minutes. So that means that we have to wait on the surface until we have 18 minutes or less in a 70-foot table. Where do we find that information? Well, that's here in the residual nitrogen timetable and surface interval credit table. So I'm going to be working horizontally again. 70-foot column, I'm looking for 18 or less. These numbers are awful high, way higher, 49, 44, 39. They're getting smaller. I have to wait. Here's 25, 20, 18 or less. Here we go, 16. Right there. Fits under the C category. That means I have to wait until I'm a C diver before I can make this dive. If I'm an F diver at the beginning of my surface interval, F is right here. Scroll across to where it intersects with C, and there's two numbers, 2 hours and 38 minutes and 3 hours and 31 minutes. I am asking you for the minimum surface interval, which happens to be 2 hours and 38 minutes, right here. Okay? So we'll write that information for charting purposes here. 2005, reach the surface. 2 hours and 38 minutes later, I'm going to leave the surface as a C diver. So that means I'm going to leave the surface at 22:43. That's 10:43 at night. I am going to 65 feet. Do I have residual nitrogen? Absolutely I do. How much? Let's check again. I'm going to 70 feet. Actually 65 feet, but I'm using the 70-foot table. It tells me I have 16 minutes of residual nitrogen time. 16, I write it here. I write my actual bottom time here, and then again down here at the bottom. I didn't do that here on this example, but you want to write that 30 minutes right in down here. Okay? So you'll have 30 minutes right in down here. Depth on the outside, time on the inside. The sum of those two numbers is what you must use to pick your repetitive group or your decompression schedule. So I am looking for 70 feet for 46 minutes on the tables. It's a no decompression, no stop schedule. 70 for 46, does it fit? No, but there's a 70 for 47. If we follow that number up, we see that it puts us on the surface as a J diver. I'm going to write J in here. Leaving the surface at 22:43. 30 minutes later, I'm leaving the bottom at 23:13, 11:13 at night. I am traveling 65 lineal feet times 2 is ascent time in seconds. That's 130 seconds, or 2 minutes and 10 seconds. We're going to round that up to 3 minutes for charting purposes and start the diver's surface interval at 23:16. The diver is a J diver. Take that information, transpose it onto the last dive at the beginning of our surface interval. Okay, 23:16, I'm a J diver. And again, I'm going to ask you how deep you can go to make a no deep compression dive given a particular surface interval and a bottom time. I'm giving you a surface interval of 12 hours. You can immediately compute your new group going back into water. So a J diver for 12 hours, and let's see what the new group is. J for 12 hours. Here is J. We scroll across until we find 12 hours. 7:01, 8:16, 8:17, 10:36. There's no 12 hours. What does this mean? This means that the diver is completely off-gassed after 10 hours and 36 minutes. So after 10 hours and 37 minutes, that diver is, quote, clean. Technically not. There's still some residual nitrogen in there. Modern decompression theory tells us that there still is residual nitrogen in there, but the Navy does not take that into account and says for all intents and purposes the diver is clean, and that's what we're going to use. So this is not a repetitive dive, so I draw a line through that repetitive group designation here on the tables or on the square wave chart. So this is not a repetitive dive. So now I'm simply asking you, what is the maximum depth you can go to make a no decompression dive for 20 minutes? Well, if we have no residual nitrogen time, we don't have to account for it. So we can come straight over to our no decompression timetable here and look where the deepest depth for no decompression for 20 minutes is. And that happens to be at 110 feet. There's 20 right there. So we're going to go ahead and chart that. We'll write 110 as our depth, and we're going to write 0 for RNT since there is none. It's not a repetitive dive. 20 minutes is our actual bottom time. Write it here and here. Leaving the surface at 11:16 in the morning. 23:16, 12 hours later is 11:16 the next day. Add 20 minutes to it. That's 11:36. That's what time we bring the diver off bottom. Bottom time stops when they leave bottom to make the direct ascent to the surface. The diver is now coming up at 30 feet a minute from 110 feet. They're traveling 110 lineal feet times 2. That's 220 seconds it should take you. Double colon right here, 220 seconds. That happens to be 4 minutes. 60 goes into 220 3 times with 40 seconds left over. Okay, so 3 minutes and 40 seconds, that diver's head would break the surface if they were traveling at a perfect 30 feet a minute. So 11:39 and 40 seconds. We're going to round that number up for charting purposes and start the diver's surface interval at 11:40 as an H diver. So our schedule is 110 for 20. Where do we get that H from? 110 for 20 is right here. Scroll back up and you see it's under the H category right here. So there we are. 11:40, you're an H diver. And that's it for example number 4.